Hello, my name is Francisco Guarnero, and I would like to speak to you about some heavy topics like doubts, depression, burnout, and spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse is when a spiritual leader wields his position of spiritual authority in such a way that he manipulates, domineers, bullies, and intimidates those under him as a means of maintaining his own power and control, even if he is convinced he is seeking biblical and kingdom-related goals. The Apostle Paul covers this when discussing the qualifications for overseers and deacons in 1 Timothy 3, verses 2 and 3. It says, "Now the overseers is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money." As you can see, Paul requires that overseers not be violent, but gentle. Michael J. Kruger concludes in his book, Bully Pulpit, Confronting the Problem of Spiritual Abuse in the Church, by outlining a threefold strategy of prevention, accountability, and protection. The best way to stop abusive pastors is to never let them achieve positions of power in the first place. He writes, when churches and ministries interview prospective leaders, they need to make clear that they value character over competency, teamwork over hierarchy, and accountability over secrecy. Those values tend to weed out abusive leaders. What about depression? Data was collected from June to December in 2020, and unfortunately, nearly 4 of 10 pastors showed signs of at least a mild level of depression, which is enough to meet the diagnostic criteria for depressive disorder. It is important not to ignore any signs or symptoms of depression, such as low energy, unusual weight loss or gain, difficulty concentrating, or a loss of interest in activities that were once meaningful. It's also important to make sure you cultivate close friendships and be mindful of your spiritual well-being. Burnout can also be a problem for ministers. The term burnout refers to an emotional or physical exhaustion resulting from long-term repeated exposure to both external and internal stressors. External signs of burnout can include chronic fatigue, insomnia, intestinal upset, forgetfulness, a sense of uselessness, increased cynicism, and addictive behaviors. It is not a sudden onset problem. It occurs over time, often as a byproduct of inadequate coping and adaptive skills. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." I think it's easy to fall into burnout. I've experienced it a little myself. Usually when I see a need, I have a tendency to want to fill it. But over time, all these different acts of service begin to become overwhelming. Now, if you have a lot on your plate and you're getting overwhelmed, you're probably doing something God hasn't asked you to do. To avoid burnout or to recover from burnout, you can find a trusted friend, counselor, or colleague to talk to, and you can talk about those issues. You can work with them to establish healthy boundaries and remember to know your limitations. Obey God by observing the Sabbath and recognize that God loves you. What do we do if we're a minister and we're having doubts? Pastors, ministers, and leaders, we're all human, and it's common to go through difficult seasons. During these times, we can start doubting our ministry or our faith. What is the biblical response? We need to determine the source. Are you suffering from fatigue, interpersonal conflict, or overly high expectations? Or do we have a genuine intellectual question? Doubts can reflect stressors in ministry, when the daily drudgery and frustrations drown out the passion of your call. Once you determine the source, be honest with yourself and plan an appropriate approach. Let your doubts be an impetus to learn and grow. Also remember Psalms 23 verses 1 to 3. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He lays me beside quiet waters and refreshes my soul. Finally, locate and deploy resources. You can look for answers in the Bible, of course, and you can look for answers in other Christian books. Now, my advice is do not overlook trusted friends that you can confide in and talk to you about these doubts. If you're experiencing any of these things I mentioned today, I encourage you to not isolate, and I encourage you to draw closer to God. I hope this was helpful in some way. Thank you, and God bless.